Hi everyone, it's Ren here. You know who it is, good to see you guys. In this video I will be talking about philosophy, as is my habit. More specifically, I'll be talking about open metaphysics, the metaphysical arm of my system, Open Monism, that you're probably familiar with by now, so I will jump straight into it. In the last installment of this series, I was detailing sort of the basic metaphysical layers that are the very basis of Open Monism, and I was talking about being and its three aspects. So being apprehended under the aspect of its reality, which means the limits of its logical conceivability. I was talking about its aspect as immanence, insofar as being has content. And I was also mentioning another aspect, the aspect of open-groundedness, rather the aspect of structure, which in practice I define as having open-groundedness as its shape. It's an interesting distinction between the different aspects of being, which, as you remember, are not necessarily the only aspects that there are. I'm always on the lookout for new aspects to be experienced, but I just think that these three different aspects provide a decent picture of being. It's interesting to note that the aspect of reality is slightly different in nature than the aspects of immanence and structure, or rather the aspect of immanence and structure, which we also could call the aspect of content and structure, also known as immanence and open-groundedness. It's currently a chapter that I'm kind of working on, since I finished writing my ethical section, which is spread over a few chapters. I have been, how to say this, I've been returning to metaphysics because there were certain points that I wanted to detail. I was requested or just criticized constructively by some readers who were asking more, for more specification regarding the individuation of entities in Open Monism, different kinds of beings and actualized beings. So I felt like I had to return to open metaphysics to specify it further. So in presenting, the basics of open metaphysics here, I'll also be making use of the recent insights and the recent discoveries that I have made, in some pretty current research, pretty current leg of my research into the open monistic framework. Again, thanks to a lot of comments, a lot of collaborative effort, I want to say, maybe I'm the curator of it and I come up with the concepts, but for the refinement of them, for having different perspectives, I really benefit a massive amount from the people that follow what I'm doing. And I wish that I could answer them all the time or often, but I have a job. I have a full-time job. On the side, I try to dedicate as much time as possible every day to writing Open Monism in my notes, and I'm also reading. So sometimes I don't spend as much time as I would like answering people. But even when I don't answer them, even when I only press a like to their messages, doesn't mean that I'm not reacting. Doesn't mean that I'm not taking into account what they're saying. Often what they are saying, I'm reflecting on it. It's hanging around my mind, and I really take it into account, and it influences me. So I always want to acknowledge the people who take the time to contribute. and this video, in a sense, is going to present a little bit more about immanence in the next 5 minutes or so. in such a way that it would have been different a few weeks ago and maybe a month or two ago. And part of why it is an updated version is precisely because I'm taking into account what people say. When I believe it to be directly relevant to my research, of course. So now that that's said, what can I say about immanence, and in what way are immanence and structure different than reality insofar as they are aspects of being? Well, this will be an introduction to my discussion of immanence in more detail, but in essence, if you like, reality is a realm of the logically conceivable. It provides the limits of being. In a sense, it is sufficient unto itself. Once you say it is a realm of the logically conceivable, it has that dimension. You might say it has only that dimension. It's sufficient. We know what it is. It is the limits. Beyond it is what cannot be talked about, what does not have reality, what it would be fallacious to pretend has reality, or to speak of as if it were real. In fact, to speak of at all, because it is not possible to talk about what is not. Insofar as we speak, rather than muttering unintelligible sounds or just onomatopoeias, or even not onomatopoeias our language, but insofar as we don't just utter sounds, insofar as we use language, we use symbols to represent the world, and insofar as we do that effectively so that we are understood by other people, we are using a language whose inherent structure and content reflects the structure and content of the world. This is how the representation can work. So language is about what is. It cannot be about what is not. Nothingness. Either nothingness is just one word to refer to something that actually cannot be referred to, or nothingness is a contradiction in a way, because there can be no word for what it's supposed to represent. But that's interesting, because the reality is a realm that says, okay, like being is logically conceivable. What is not logically conceivable is not being, is not. And that's all that you need to know about the aspect of reality. Whereas the aspect of immanence, as well as the aspect of open-groundedness, is different. Because in fact, the aspect is the aspect of being that I call immanence is actually being as content, and the aspect of being that I call open-groundedness is actually being as structure. In other words, immanence and open-groundedness are not, technically speaking, the aspects of being. The aspects are content and structure in the same way that reality is another aspect. And you can sense that the concept of content and the concept of structure are in a certain way conceptually antecedents to the way that we decide to name them, whether they be content as immanence or contents as structure as open-groundedness. In my recent research, I say that there are just two dimensions to how the word content is articulated. It relates to being as an aspect of it, but to say that being as content does not really say much. You need to then specify, inform, fill up the content. And this I do via reference to immanence. And so I say that the content of being as a depth, I call it a depth or a shape. I also call it, in a slightly more technical terms, also slightly more ponderous terms, the abstract concreteness, which structure also has. Structure by itself does not really mean anything. A structure, to be a structuring principle, needs to have a certain shape, or certain depth, or certain concreteness. Even if it is a formal or abstract kind of concreteness, it still needs to have a concreteness. Reality does not really need to have that abstract concreteness, because it only provides limits. And once you say it's the realm of the logically conceivable, you've already kind of said all you needed to say. whereas in the case of content, you need to specify its shape, its depth. I call it immanence, and in the case of structure, I call it open groundedness. This is actually important because the fact that there's like another dimension added to the signifying relation between being and its content, or between being and its structure, if you like, what structure refers to as a word, as a signifier, is what we understand as structure plus the specific structure, the specific shape of the structure, and the same applies to content and immanence. And this will be very important because in a later section, a later video, I will explain that the fact that the signifying relation is two-dimensional instead of just one-dimensional, like maybe we could say is the case of the word reality to signify reality, logically conceivable. Because of the fact that there is another dimension present in the concept of structure with the word structure, and the concept of I'm getting a bit mixed up here, and the concept of content with its references dimension of immanence. We cannot refer to essence to say the essence of content or the essence of immanence is this, the essence of structure is that, because you remember that the concept of essence is not one that I really use in Open Monism, but essence I think can work to list certain essential properties. Essence can work when you're talking about a one-dimensional kind of signifying relation. When you talk about a concept one-dimensionally, like a reality, you can talk about reducing it to its essence. Say, okay, one-dimensionally these different properties are, but because content and structure have a shape, which implies a second dimension of the signifying relation, then in that case, essence no longer works to quite capture what they are, to reduce what they are to its kernel. I don't want to say to its essence, because again, it's a word I'm not really allowed to use. But you can really see that language is always laying traps for me, so I have to avoid them. So now that I've said that, and now that I've given this little introduction to the way that the aspect of reality is different in nature, as a sort of more one-dimensional than the aspect, not meaning it's less important or less primordial, but it just happens to be to have fewer dimensions in a sense than contents and structure. In the next video, I'll be properly delving into the concept of immanence as content. See you guys. Thank you.